Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. This week, bringing you a special American Probation and Parole Association edition. As the voice of the community corrections industry, APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. In addition to their U.S. members, the American Probation and Parole Association is supported by international members who are actively involved in strengthening community corrections work in their own countries. APPA's International Relations Committee aims to connect community corrections professionals around the world to inspire and share insights from their unique experiences and best practices. Welcome to this special APPA episode of The Criminologist. And now, welcome your host, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 121 of the Criminologist podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. This week, bringing you a very special hybrid edition as we are teaming up with our good friends at the American Probation and Parole Association, in particular, their International Relations Committee. We hope to weave in more and more of these special edition episodes in the future, so stay tuned in particular for those. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of the American Probation and Parole Association, allow me to bring you some brief contextual information before I share my conversation with this week's very special guest. APPA is really the voice of the community corrections industry. APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. Their work is supported by thousands of passionate members throughout the United States and Canada, as well as other countries actively involved in strengthening community corrections work. Now, if you are not a probation or parole officer, no worries. The American Probation and Parole Association has members at all levels of government and private sector agencies, including community corrections professionals, service providers, libraries and educators, research students, volunteers, concerned citizens, corporations, public policy advocates, and others with an interest in criminal and juvenile justice. In fact, everything that APPA does is aimed at reducing recidivism to keep our communities safe. That means strengthening the role of the community corrections industry. Now, let me give you a brief history. Prior to the founding of APPA, community corrections professionals had no collective voice. Having no national representation fighting for best practices and policies in the field inspired some of America's most distinguished correctional administrators to act. Now, APPA accomplishes this in a variety of ways. In the field, they publish a periodical known as Perspective. They're responsible for research reports, guidelines, and webinars, and other web-based products and services. For the professional, they host training institutes, have an outstanding APPA Leadership Institute, and are also involved in on-site training and online training. Finally, APPA is all about best practices, advocating for evidence-based practices and policies in the field, organizing committees, hosting issue-specific groups, and leading focus groups. If you are interested and would like to learn more about the American Probation and Parole Association, I will leave some fantastic links in the episode description of this podcast, so please check those out. In the meantime, very excited to be bringing you our very first APPA crossover guest. Willow Baker is the program director of the Prem Rawat Foundation's signature Peace Education Program, an innovative series of video-based workshops that help people discover and develop their inner strength and personal peace. These workshops are available in over 70 countries in 37 different languages. Willow has had the opportunity to work and travel in Africa and throughout Europe. I am so excited to have the opportunity to share her insights and expertise, so please Enjoy my conversation with Willow Baker, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Willow, and thank you so much for being our guest for our very first APPA special edition, in which we're hoping to specifically shine a light on and highlight some of the great work being done by the International Relations Committee. Why don't we start off by you telling us just a little bit about yourself, Willow? Generally speaking, some of your perhaps educational and vocational milestones.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you very much for having me. And it's really a pleasure. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited to do this. Well, I grew up in Columbus, Indiana, Arlington Heights, Illinois, and Chappaqua, New York. I got my Bachelor of Arts at Denison University in Granville, Ohio, and my master's at the Université de Paris in Paris, France. So I've actually had several career paths, including in France, teaching specialized English for advertising, public relations, journalism, and agroeconomic development. I've managed a video production company. I've done translation and interpretation and did business development for a translation and interpretation agency. And I feel that the experience and competencies that I acquired during those various career paths have all culminated now in becoming the program director for the Peace Education Program of the Prem Rawat Foundation, which I started doing 3.5 years ago. I'm also a peace ambassador for the Institute of Economics and Peace, and I'm the peace chair at my local Rotary International Club here in dry and sunny Southern California.
Before we do a deeper dive on some of your projects, including, of course, your peace education program, could you take a moment to introduce our listeners to the work of the aforementioned International Relations Committee of the American Probation and Parole Association? My thought, Willow, is that most members may not even be aware of the international aspects of APPA.
Sure, Joe. So the International Relations Committee is formed of a diverse group of about a dozen members of APPA, mostly from the US and Canada and Europe. But our goal is to promote APPA's international involvement, to encourage submissions for international workshops at the training institutes organized by APPA, and to provide articles to Perspectives, which is APPA's journal.
I am actually really excited to ask you about this, as noted. Tell us about your peace education program, quote, helping people discover personal peace. Perhaps start with introducing the listeners to Prem Rawat and his inspiring work.
Thank you, Joe. Well, Prem Rawat is, in my opinion, an amazing person with a unique perspective on peace and other aspects of life. He's a best-selling author, peace educator, pilot, who has dedicated his life to inspiring people to experience the source of peace within themselves. His work spans now 6 decades of international efforts to bring a practical message of hope, happiness, and peace. One thing that I really, really appreciate from his talks, the excerpts of which are in the Peace Education Program, is his unconditional positive regard. So many people who go through the Peace Education Program comment, how did he know me? How did he know my background? Why? This isn't possible. Why are all these other people here? He's talking just to me. And I had the same experience when I first heard him speak too. So he has founded the Prem Rawat Foundation to advance dignity, peace, and prosperity by addressing the fundamental human needs of food, water, and peace. As he puts it, it's hard to speak to someone about peace if their stomach is grumbling because they're really, really hungry. So the Prem Rawat Foundation has established 3 centers called Food for People, one in Ghana, one in Nepal, and one in India, where we work with local NGOs to provide good, clean, local food and water, food that people find really delicious. And surprising, this is mostly for the children and the elderly. And in all of those locations, the schools have had to, educational systems have had to add new schools. Crime has gone down and health has increased just because people are getting good, clean food and water. The foundation also provides humanitarian aid to various NGOs around the world, like currently for COVID and for victims of the war in the Ukraine.
So the Peace Education Program actually consists of a series of video-based workshops. What can folks expect from that experience, Willow?
I love this question. Actually, I've never been asked this question in that way. And I think it's really a fun question. I think that anyone going through the Peace Education Program can expect to have a good time, to the experience is individual. So each person going through the course will experience it differently. The course does not try to define or prescribe what individual peace is. It's left to each participant to discover that for themselves. But I think that anyone going through the course would say that they know themselves better afterwards. Actually, Prem Rawat describes it sometimes as an introduction to yourself. So I think you'll enjoy yourself. You will definitely hear a unique perspective on 10 themes. And those themes are peace, appreciation, inner strength, self-awareness, clarity, understanding, dignity, choice, hope, and contentment. The course is strength-based, so you won't be discovering what your weaknesses are, but you will be focusing on the good person, the strengths that you have. And again, there's that unconditional positive regard, both through the course materials and the facilitator. I could give you some examples of different kinds of people who've gone through the course because it's used in many different sectors. It wasn't designed for any specific sector. And that's actually one thing that a lot of people like about it. So in drug rehab, it wasn't designed for drug rehab. It wasn't designed for probation. It was designed for human beings. So several people who are incarcerated have said, if I'd heard this before, I wouldn't be here in this place wearing this uniform. An Australian Aboriginal person said that she gained a deeper understanding of her culture and a stronger connection to nature. People who have struggled in school and had to drop out of school for one reason or another find that they have gained confidence and are happy to continue studying because they finally completed a course successfully. One probation officer noted that she had a greater understanding of where to find peace and helped her deal with the stressors of her profession. Often within groups, and this was particularly true in Trinidad and Tobago, there were people from very different cultures and religions, and they listened to each other's reflections and realized they didn't agree with each other, but that was okay. So there was the development of empathy. So at one domestic violence intervention court, they went through the course and found it to be a team building course, which it wasn't designed to be that way. But
Right.
they found that the peace education program solidified their collaboration, helped them get to know each other more personally, and gave them what they described as a collective language from which to communicate that has significantly improved their team's ability to communicate. So as I said, it's not designed for any specific sector or any type of person.
Which is so appealing to me, Willow. And I made a note when you said it's designed for human beings. One of the themes of this podcast is I'm always trying to sort of tear down the binary us versus them approach we tend to take, at least in corrections. And again, when it comes to interventions or approaches or whatever you want to call it, I think it just behooves us, again, not to look at our interventions as sort of, well, that's for those people, not for us, right? Like you said, this is for all humans. I had a guest on just last week, Professor Joe Clark, who talks a lot about resiliency and building resiliency. And she almost sort of took that same approach of, well, you could apply these techniques to at-risk children or justice-involved individuals or to your staff members for that matter. And again, I just think it helps tear down that sort of binary us, them, they're different kind of thing. So that was music to my ears when you said that. And thank you for sprinkling in, again, sort of the correctional aspect of how this could be applied. Speaking of which, I know you will be presenting on this, I believe, coming up when APPA has their next training institute in Chicago. For folks who are going to be in Chicago, what can they expect, or do you want to maybe give a sneak peek of what that might be all about?
Sure. So our presentation is a panel presentation. It's called An Empowering Approach to Well-Being, Peace Education Program. So it's actually on Tuesday at 2:15. And some of the people from this domestic violence intervention court, which I just mentioned, will be presenting with me. They're from Summit County, Ohio. For those who don't know, that's where Akron is. There's a lot going on there. And I was very touched how enthusiastic these two women, one is the program director and one is actually the facilitator of the course, for the staff and for the clients, how enthusiastic they were about coming to Chicago to be able to help present the peace education program. And they've done something interesting. Both the staff and their clients go through the course together as participants.
Wow.
This happened recently in Zimbabwe. So the Commissioner General of the Zimbabwe Prisons and Correction Services discovered the peace education program at a conference in Argentina. And it took a few months because right afterwards there was COVID. But members of his staff learned to facilitate the course over Zoom. And then they decided to have the staff and the incarcerated individuals go through the course together. So Zimbabwe is a place where a guard will wear a very impressive uniform. They wore their civilian clothes. Of course, you could distinguish because they weren't wearing an orange uniform.
Sure.
There they were going through the course together. And I think that was a great innovation. They were so pleased with it because they learned so much about each other. And I've gotten a little off track on this presentation. So the moderator of our panel is Julie Truchel, whom you've interviewed, who is the chairperson of the International Relations Committee of APPA, because the panel is being sponsored by IRC as an international presentation. There will be a doctor from the United Kingdom, Dr. Mitesh Desai, who's actually been studying the impact of the peace education program on various populations. These two amazing women from Ohio and myself, and a video that we'll be showing. We will, at Julie's request, spend time on helping people know how they can implement the program. We won't just be singing the praises of the program, but also going into practical steps of how they could bring it into their agency. Another presenter who will be joining us remotely is Alberto Ovando of Mexico. He really wanted to come, but right now, getting a visa to the U.S. from Mexico seems to be taking about a year. He works for the Mexican government in the security, and he will be presenting how he discovered the peace education program and has been able to implement it in various, with the security staff and with various community organizations. And his experience about it is quite touching. He speaks about what he learned, and when he went through the course, he was assessing it to see if it would be useful in his work. He wasn't really approaching it as I'm going through the course. But in the end, he said he discovered so much, and it really transformed him in that he was raised that men don't cry. Men keep their emotions to themselves. They don't express them. And he enjoyed the course so much that he's now, as a volunteer, facilitating it in many community settings.
Willow, when you were speaking about your experiences with the Zimbabwe prison, it reminded me of some of the work that I've been exposed to and a part of, but it also taps into this theme of sort of co-production or co-elevation, if you will, between staff members and inmates creating the program, which again, it sounds like you and your team have tapped into that sort of same brilliance of why wouldn't you include those folks in the design of the program as peers, other than this is something we're doing to you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, in the state of Sao Paulo, Brazil, the course is facilitated almost entirely by people who are incarcerated.
Which is amazing. And again, I would ask our U.S. listeners and others if they could imagine, again, what if that became modus operandi, right? Standard operating procedure when we design a prison whatever program or a high-intensity supervision parole program, that if we actually included those folks at the center of that wheel, yeah, what a difference that would make. I want to talk a little bit more about Chicago. And again, I know it's coming up and most folks are probably already have their registration in, but I know this from when I presented last year in Atlanta, that there's also a virtual option for folks to attend certain events. I know they're not all going to be simulcast in video, but I believe some of them are. So could you maybe speak to that if people are listening and saying, oh, I didn't get my registration in, but I still want to dip my toe into the APPA conference coming up in Chicago? What might that look like for those folks?
I'd actually really love to speak about that. I have participated in 3 or 4 of the training institutes virtually. And actually, several of the facilitators of the Peace Education Program will be joining virtually too. So my understanding is that virtually, and it's as you mentioned, it's live. You get to hear, I say you because I'm going in person this time. I'm happy to be going in person at last. You get to hear the opening plenary session, which for this one starting this summer training institute should be really interesting because it's 2 guests from the Ukrainian probation services. And then the closing plenary session is by a man named Joe Roberts, who the title of his presentation is From Skid Row to CEO. You also get to participate in, although sometimes the microphone isn't necessarily open to you, but through the chat, you can send in your comments and questions and someone will read them. So you can participate in the Juvenile Justice Forum. And my favorite part of the APPA Institute so far has been the Racial Justice Town Hall. I have learned so much from these presentations. And I believe that at this particular institute, Veronica Cunningham will be presenting an initiative to advance racial equity in the criminal legal system. So I think if you could join virtually and only attend one thing, I would recommend that one. I've learned so much. Then there are also 10 sessions that will pre-recorded that are available starting online on Monday, the 22nd, and will be there through the middle of September. And I think there are other pre-recorded webinars. So having had the experience of joining virtually, I would say it's definitely worth it.
What I will do then, Willow, is leave the requisite web links in the description of this episode for folks who may want to take you up. And again, I could not say more about that virtual experience. It's a great option for folks who can't make the trip to Chicago. Hey, speaking of trips, before I forget, you are also going to be at the World Congress I believe it's in Ottawa this year?
Yes, it is, at the end of September.
And I know I've got other listeners who've approached me and asked, Joe, are you going to be at the World Congress? So if you want to give a shout out to the World Congress coming up, do so for folks who may be able to swing that conference as well.
Well, I'm not familiar with the entire schedule yet, but I can tell you that nearly all of the members of the International Relations Committee will be present there. Many of them will be presenting. I will be presenting the Peace Education Program and also showing a documentary called Inside Peace that was shown on PBS. It's a documentary of a group of incarcerated men in San Antonio, Texas, going through the Peace Education Program, and also their story after they are released, the struggles they have and how the program helped them find their resilience.
And Willow, how can an agency or even an individual learn more about or even get access to those workshop videos?
Well, besides participating in the presentation at the APPA Summer Training Institute, you can visit our website, which is tprf.org, standing for the Prem Rawat Foundation. You can write to PEP, as in Peace Education Program, at tprf.org, where you can request to join a 10-session virtual or in-person course, or have a short orientation session and sample course. And any individual or organization can apply to TPRF for a free license to offer the course to interested groups. And then the foundation will give you digital access to all the materials free of charge, as well as training on implementing the course.
Willow, for those who may be attending their very first APPA Institute in Chicago, could you tell us what you've learned or even appreciated at previous APPA conferences?
Yes. So I have attended one conference in person. It was recommended to me by several people within corrections who said you really have to bring this to people who are on probation and parole. They really could use it too. So I attended, I became a member, and I attended my first APPA conference in winter 2020, just before COVID, in New Orleans. And I have to admit, not being from the field, I didn't know what to expect. My experience or my exposure to parole officers was through movies, I have to admit, which doesn't really portray them in the best of lights. And I was a little overwhelmed by these amazing people that I met who cared so much about people. I don't have any friends who are probation or parole officers, so I didn't really know what motivates someone to join this profession. And at the APPA conference, I met so many dedicated people who really sincerely want to help people have transformational experiences and live fulfilling lives, that there were presentations that brought me to tears. They were just so inspiring, and I'm really looking forward to the conference this year. And again, for those of you who can't make it in person, it's worth it to join it virtually too.
I chuckled when you mentioned that you learned most of what you knew about probation and parole officers from the movies. I used to teach an undergraduate course on criminal justice in the media, but to your point, yes, it's very sad how not just the public, but even policymakers and legislatures learn about probation, parole, corrections, criminal justice in general from the media. So I like dispelling as many of those myths as possible. Hey, finally, we have been talking about the International Relations Committee. Any favorite projects connected with that endeavor that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, yes. Yes, there were one project that we worked on was 2 special editions of Perspectives, which is APPA's journal, that were focused on international restorative justice, where we contacted people whom we knew, our contacts, and they contributed articles. We worked together with them on writing articles on various themes and RJ practices from around the world.
Yeah, lovely. And again, I'm just really excited to be sharing the work of the IRC, which again, as an APPA member, I really had no idea that APPA was spreading the good word globally. So I really appreciate that. And Willow, I really appreciate you being our first guest on this very special APPA edition of the Criminologist podcast. Listeners, track down Willow if you're in Chicago or at the World Conference up in Canada, or join us virtually for APPA in Chicago. Willow, thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
A huge Criminologist podcast thank you to Willow Baker, Program Director of the Prem Rawat Foundation's Peace Education Program. If you happen to be attending the APPA Training Institute coming up in Chicago, track Willow down and tell her, hey, I heard about you and your presentation on the Criminologist podcast. As promised, I'm going to leave links in the episode description of this program to the American Probation and Parole Association in general, and I'm also going to leave you within that a link to their Chicago registration information, whether it's in person or, again, we talked about that great option to attend select activities virtually. You also heard us talking about some of the folks who have taken advantage of the Peace Education Program. So I'm going to leave you some cool little links in there. A nice YouTube video shot by a filmmaker highlighting the work of Billa Nanra, and then also some podcast that Billa Nanra has been on, again, highlighting some of the great work that Willow's involved with. Longtime listeners will note that I've been talking about merchandise being available and asking that you simply reach out to me. I've made that a little bit easier. I've now updated our website, and if you look for the tab that says Shop, you will see purchasing options for Criminologist coffee mugs, refrigerator magnets, or pens. So again, you could visit our website at theparagongroup.llc.com and click on the Shop tab, and you'll have access to some of that cool Criminologist merchandise. Back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our aforementioned website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, implementation, program design, or of course, the topic of desistance from crime. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New, fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. Go ahead and give us a follow. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, or Willow Baker on LinkedIn, and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word. Tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast. And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
And at the APPA conference, I met so many dedicated people who really sincerely want to help people have transformational experiences and live fulfilling lives, that there were presentations that brought me to tears. They were just so inspiring, and I'm really looking forward to the conference this year.
This has been a special APPA edition of The Criminologist Podcast. Their international relations team looks forward to sharing the insights of other subject matter experts from around the world in future episodes. The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.